What would happen if a being beyond God stepped into a universe where there is only war? The question hangs in the void like a whispered secret, and with it our journey begins. This is not a tale of mortals. This is not the story of empires or armies, though both will bleed and burn before it ends. No, this is the story of an outsider, a stranger, a question given for, the being known only as the Beyonder. Before we step into the shadows of the 41st millennium, where the Imperium of Man rots upon its throne of gold and chaos stirs in the warp, we must understand the immensity of the intruder who arrived without warning. Imagine a power so great it humbled Galactus, the devourer of worlds. Imagine a will that defied the Celestials, the architects of creation themselves. Imagine a mind so curious it once plucked entire heroes and villains from across realities and forced them into war, shaping their destinies in what mortals called the Secret Wars. That was the Beyonder. Not a god, not a demon, not even a man, but something stranger, purer, more terrifying. Curiosity incarnate. Desire without need, power without purpose. And then, one day, he looked beyond his own multiverse, into a place where stars burned dim with despair. A place unlike anything he had ever seen. The 41st millennium. Here is a galaxy where every soul is shackled in faith or fear, where every world is drenched in blood, where even gods are not born of choice, but of misery. What would happen if I changed the rules? The words were never spoken aloud, yet they rang across the fabric of reality. And with no thunder, no rift, no storm in the warp, he was simply there. He did not arrive like a conqueror, nor as a herald. He appeared in silence, a ripple in the fabric of the materium, as though reality itself had blinked. One moment, the galaxy groaned under the endless drums of war. The next, there was a stranger walking its broken streets. He began in the hives of Necromunda, one of the darkest symbols of the Imperium's decay. Imagine a world built not upward or outward, but open itself towers of steel, ash, and misery piled layer upon layer, until the skies are swallowed and the ground is long forgotten. A billion souls packed in filth, their lives measured not in years, but in shifts, breaths, and wounds. Here, the Beyonder walked unnoticed at first, a silent figure in white, his eyes reflecting only curiosity. He saw the endless rows of laborers, their bodies scarred by soot and smoke, their spirits chained to survival. And he asked one, a woman whose hands were blackened by the factory's fire, what she endured. Her answer was simple, and it chilled him more than any cosmic judgment. Because there is nothing else. The Beyonder tilted his head. To him, there was always something else. With a thought, he remade her factory into a palace of light, her broken body into perfection. For a moment, she was free. But freedom, to those who have never known it, is terror. She screamed, unable to bear such sudden change. Around her, others fell to their knees in worship or in fear. The hive erupted into chaos. Riots burned through the underhive as the warp itself trembled with a surge of raw, unfiltered emotion. The Beyonder only smiled. To him, it was a question answered. What happens when you show slaves the chains they could escape? But questions never end. They multiply. He wandered next to Armageddon, a world locked in endless war. Here, orcs clashed eternally with the Imperium, green-skinned warriors whose laughter was louder than the roar of cannons. The Beyonder was fascinated. Unlike humans, who wept under the burden of faith and fear, orcs reveled in war. They did not fight because they had to. They fought because they believed in it. Their very belief bent reality. Guns that should not work fired, machines that should not run, thundered across the battlefield, and wounds that should have killed were shrugged off with a grin. The Beyonder leaned close to a war boss, a hulking beast drenched in blood and pride, and whispered, "What if your belief were infinite?" The war boss roared, his voice shaking the heavens, and in that instant, across the stars, a sun cracked in half. Not by science, not by sorcery, but by conviction. The orcs cheered. The Imperium panicked. The galaxy shuddered, and the Beyonder laughed. Here was something that reminded him of Earth's mutants, of those like Franklin Richards or the Scarlet Witch, whose powers were shaped by belief, by will, by thought. But the orcs, they needed no training, no evolution. Their belief alone was a weapon. The Beyonder clapped his hands, delighted. No. Beyond the borders of mankind's empire, his curiosity deepened. He drifted among alien civilizations, testing them as a child tests toys. Tute Eldar. He perda salvation. He plucked a soul from the grip of Slaanesh, their dark god of excess, and offered it back to its people. But salvation, severed from fate, unraveled into madness. The Eldar wept, cursed, and despaired. And the Beyonder chuckled. To the Necrons, he was mischief. He split their silent king into 1,000 duplicates, each with its own will. Civil war erupted. Dynasties burned anew, and the Beyonder only whispered, "Fascinating." 2. The Tyranids. 2. The Tyranid, the great devourer. He posed a question no one had ever asked. What do you hunger for, if not to consume? And for the briefest heartbeat, the hive mind hesitated. Across entire sectors, swarms froze mid-flight. A silence fell so deep it suffocated the stars. Then came the screams. For hunger paused as hunger denied, and reality itself recoiled at what might emerge if hunger became ambition. The Beyonder's curiosity grew, but so did the whispers in the warp. For every step he took, every experiment, every question asked, fed the immaterium itself. Mortals screamed, despaired, hoped, feared, and in that storm, the chaos god stirred. They had felt such disturbances before. Crusades, heresies, apocalypses, but never this. This was not the rise of a Primarch. This was not the shattering of a world. This was something alien. Something that broke their very laws of existence. A being who killed without rage, who changed without purpose, who created without worship. The ruinous powers turned their gaze upon the stranger, and the age of unending war had just grown stranger still. The warp had begun to boil. Every whisper of mortal fear that the Beyonder unleashed echoed louder than thunder in that realm of madness. Khorne stirred first, the blood god of endless war. His throne forged of skulls rattling as rivers of blood rose higher. He had never known a being who destroyed not for wrath, not for vengeance, but for curiosity. To Khorne, such indifference was an insult. The rage of 10,000 berserkers ignited at once. Their axes raised to slay the nameless stranger who dared mock the purity of slaughter. Yet the Beyonder simply appeared before them on a battlefield drenched in gore. Without lifting a weapon, without raising his voice, he froze the war in silence. Every Chanax, every roaring bolter, every arterial spray paused in midair, as though the galaxy itself had forgotten how to move. The berserkers screamed inside their unmoving shells, their fury impotent. The Beyonder tilted his head, smiled faintly, and released them. The battlefield exploded in frenzy once more. To him it was only a test. To Khorne, it was a challenge. Slaanesh was next to stir, the prince of excess and desire, who felt every ripple of mortal longing like a lover's sigh. The Beyonder's presence was irresistible, not because he tempted, but because he did not need. To Slaanesh, this was perfection in its rawest form, a being beyond want, beyond pleasure, beyond ongare. It was unbearable. The prince's demons swarmed to embrace him, to entwine him in silk and sensation, but they recoiled in agony the instant they touched him, for the Beyonder did not reject them. He simply did not acknowledge them. To be unseen, to be irrelevant, to be unloved, that was the greatest torment Slaanesh had ever felt. And so the Dark Prince wept, even as he raged. Tzeentch, the changer of ways, watched with fascination. This was no pawn, no sorcerer, no Primarch, whose fate could be twisted into schemes. The Beyonder was a variable that broke the very equation of destiny. Every attempt to scry his path dissolved into static. Every prophecy written of him burned away in flame before the ink could dry. To Tzeentch, it was intoxicating, a puzzle that refused to be solved. Perhaps this stranger was a rival architect of fate, or perhaps he was fate's destroyer. The Lord of Change laughed with 1,000 beaks at once, even as his schemes grew desperate to account for what could not be accounted for. And then came Nurgle, the Plague Father, whose garden bloomed with despair, whose love smothered worlds in rot. He welcomed the Beyonder with a smile, offering him gifts of entropy and inevitability. Yet the stranger walked through his garden untouched, the flowers of corruption wilting before they could brush against his robe. Where others were enraged, Nurgle was saddened, for here was a child who could not be embraced, who could not be bound to the cycle of decay. The Plague Father's laughter grew hollow as vines of pestilence withered at the stranger's feet. Even inevitability itself was denied. The four gods quarreled, raged, schemed, despaired. But in their discord, they knew one truth. This outsider could not remain. He was not a rival, nor a servant, nor prey. He was something else. Dari, something that threatened the very economy of suffering upon which chaos thrived. And so they acted. Across the warp, demonic hosts surged. Realities split. Worlds screamed as clawed horrors spilled into the materium, not to conquer, not to tempt, but to find him. The materium itself bent under their frenzy, and yet the Beyonder, indifferent to their hatred, wandered still. He walked across Terra itself, the throne world of man, veiled so completely in his power that even the custodies who guarded the Imperial Palace did not see him. He looked upon the golden throne, where the Emperor of mankind sat immobile, his body a ruin, his mind stretched across eternity. Billions of voices chanted prayers in the streets outside, their faith holding the Imperium together in trembling defiance of the void. The Beyonder stepped closer, curious. The Emperor's eyes opened. For the first time in millennia, the Master of Mankind stirred. The custodies did not notice. The chanting massas did not falter, but in the silence between heartbeats, the Emperor and the Beyonder looked upon each other. One was a god chained by mortality, his body rotting upon a machine that bound him to existence. The other was a god without chains, without death, without beginning or end. They did not speak. Words were too small. But the air trembled, reality flickered, and for a moment, the galaxy itself held its breath. The Beyonder raised a hand, almost playful, as though to peel back the veil of golden light that cocooned the Emperor. What might happen, he wondered, if I freed this being from his throne? What would humanity become if their god could walk again? But before he could act, a whisper coiled around him, not from the warp, not from chaos, not even from the Emperor. It was deeper, darker, older, a presence that did not belong to gods or mortals, but to the fabric of the galaxy itself. It spoke a single word, though the word was not a word at all. Leave. And for the first time, the Beyonder paused. The Beyonder did not move. For all his limitless power, all his unshakable calm, the command that had echoed across creation left an imprint. It was not fear. He did not know fear, but rather curiosity. What voice could ripple through him as though he were immortal? What presence could demand his departure without bowing to his will? His gaze swept across Terra, across the galaxy, across the warp itself, seeking the source. And then, in the darkness between stars, he saw it. The Necrons stirred. In tomb worlds buried beneath forgotten suns, stasis fields faltered, Crypts shuddered open, and legions of living metal rose in perfect silence. Across the void, countless green eyes blinked awake as if answering a summons older than mankind's first fire. A Terrahead, ancient, Katang, shards, writhed within their prisons, their fragments of star gods, burning with recognition. For they knew the truth. This outsider was not a demon, not a man, not even a god as the galaxy understood gods. He was a trespasser in the laws of reality itself, a being whose presence violated the chains the Cetan had once woven when the stars were young. On Mars, deep within the vaults of the Adeptus Mechanicus, alarms howled. Engines of prophecy would. Cogitators screamed in binary tongues, and tech priests convulsed with static visions of an impossible intruder. The Omnissiah's machine spirits wailed in terror, for they recognized a force that could unmake the logic of matter itself. Forge worlds fell silent as plasma reactors flickered without reason. Titans stood immobile, their reactors cold, as though the universe itself hesitated in his presence. And yet it was not only the Necrons who stirred. Far beyond the eastern fringe, in the cold void between galaxies, the Tyranids shifted course. Hive fleets that had consumed thousands of stars turned as one, a ripple across an endless swarm. Instinct, deeper than hunger, deeper than survival, screamed within the gestalt mind of the great devourer. It was not prey that called to them, no predator. It was something that did not belong. And so, with a hunger that transcended worlds, the Tyranids surged toward the galaxy's heart. On Terra, the Emperor's withered hand twitched, his golden light flared, pressing against the stranger's presence, as though to shield his children from a storm they could not endure. The Beyonder's smile faded, not in anger, but in contemplation. He could feel the weight of the galaxy shifting, converging upon him. Gods of the warp howling, machines of the Necrons awakening, the hunger of the Tyranids sharpening like fangs in the dark. He was the center of a spiral he had not meant to create. And then, as if the galaxy itself chose to remind him of its cruelty, the skies above Terra split. Reality screamed as a fleet of blackened warships emerged, twisted hulls, bearing the scars of 10,000 years of exile. The Eye of Terror had vomited forth a host of traitor legions, their banners drenched in heresy, their guns primed for slaughter. At their head strode Abaddon, the Despoiler, the War Master of Chaos, his gaze aflame with hatred and hunger for dominion. Yet even he, champion of the gods, faltered as his vision fell upon the stranger standing before the throne. For the first time in centuries, Abaddon's certainty cracked. He felt the weight of something greater than chaos itself, something that unraveled both destiny and damnation. Still, he raised the talon of Horus and roared. For what was Abaddon, if not defiance given form? Behind him, the legions echoed his cry, the void aflame with war. The Beyano turned. With a single glance, the ships ceased their motion. Bolters stilled, cannons froze, demons howled in confusion, not destroyed, not broken, simply paused, as though time itself had lost interest in them. He could have ended the Black Crusade with a thought, yet he did not. He merely studied them, curious, as one might study ants marching in a line. And then, almost mercifully, he released them. The guns thundered once more, the void lit with fire, and the madness of the 41st millennium resumed. But every soul who witnessed it, mortal, demon, or demigod, carried the same question in their hearts. If this being could unmake reality with a thought, why did he choose not to? The galaxy was burning, not in fire, not in plague, not even in war alone, but in possibility. The Beyonder had not come with conquest, nor with mercy. He had come with curiosity, and in that curiosity, he had broken the chains that held the galaxy together. T Imperium, Chaos, Xenos. All of them now moved in a storm that was not of their own making. The Black Crusade roared across the stars, its fleets tearing into Imperial lines. Yet within their hearts, even the traitor Astartes felt unease. They had seen the stranger halt their war with a glance, and though their gods demanded blood, whispers spread like a contagion. What if the gods themselves were afraid? For the first time in millennia, Chaos Space Marines questioned not their loyalty, but the power of their masters. In the warp, the gods raged. Khorne's throne shook with fury, his roars shaking galaxies as he bellowed for war without end. Tzeentch spun webs of schemes only to see them burn in the stranger's wake, each plan unraveling before it began. Nurgle's garden wilted where the Beyonder's thought brushed against it, his plagues tasting of ash, and Slaanesh, once eternal in pleasure, found every indulgence hollow for what could be offered to one who could remake perfection with a whim. Yet it was not chaos alone that trembled. The Necron dynasties, stirred from eons of silence, now turned their focus toward this anomaly. Tomb worlds erupted in war as overlords clashed, some demanding his destruction, others seeking to study or even enslave him. Silent Keen Sharek, far in the void, felt the tremor and understood the truth. This being was the only thing that had ever made the gods themselves hesitate. For the Necrons, who had once sought to chain divinity, this was both terror and opportunity. And then came the Tyranids, hive fleets darkened sectors, their shadow in the warp, blotting out entire star systems. But this time their hunger was different. Something in the Beyonder's touch had seeded hesitation within the hive mind, a thought, a question, a possibility of choice. That single fracture in its unity rippled like a storm, birthing new and terrifying strains that consumed not just matter, but the very laws of nature. Stars dimmed in their presence. Entire planetary crusts dissolved into and yet, behind it all, was not hunger, but something untested will. Among the Eldar, despair became terror. The Farseers read their runes and saw only blankness, their visions swallowed by the stranger's presence. For millennia, they had guided their dwindling race through strands of fate. Now, those strands were severed, replaced with questions they could not answer. The Harlequins, jesters of the laughing god, wept for the first time. Their dances turned to dirt. For if the gods themselves were irrelevant, what role remained for prophecy, for destiny, for hope? On Terra, the Emperor strained against his decaying form. His will was flame, his body a corpse, yet his soul expanded across the warp, locking in combat with this intruder. Their clash was not seen in bolts of lightning or rivers of blood, but in truths colliding. The Emperor's truth was survival at any cost. The Beyonder's truth was freedom without reason. Each pulse of their struggle rippled through existence. Stars flickered. Demons screamed. Mortals fell to their knees without knowing why. Yet the strangest reactions came not from gods or Xenos, but from humanity itself. Across the Imperium, cults rose in his name. Not of chaos, but of curiosity. They called him the Question, the Liberator, the Stranger Who Is. Some worshipped him as a savior who could erase the tyranny of faith. Others feared him as a destroyer who would unmake even the Emperor's light. Riots tore hive cities apart, not in rebellion against the Imperium, but in pursuit of understanding. For the first time, humanity dreamed not of war or survival, but of possibility. And the Beyonder. He watched. He did not raise armies, nor strike thrones. He simply observed as the galaxy tore itself apart in reaction to him. The Chaos Gods grew bloated on fear. The Necrons bled in civil war. The Tyranids shifted into something unseen. The Eldar wept, and mankind trembled before both despair and hope. Yet in all this madness, one truth became clear. The Beyonder did not need to conquer. His very existence was enough to shatter the balance of the 41st millennium. The Eye of Terror pulsed, like a wound in the galaxy, a storm of madness and eternity, where gods and demons ruled supreme. No mortal could survive within its depths. No mind could endure its shifting tides. Yet the Beyonder walked through it as if through a garden, unbothered by the fires of damnation. Reality twisted, worlds collapsed, stars melted into rivers of chaos, and still he smiled, curious, amused, unafraid. Here the Chaos Gods awaited him, united not in alliance, but in necessity. For the first time since their birth from mortal emotion, they agreed on one thing. This intruder must be destroyed. Khorne was the first to strike. His axe split continents, his roar shattered constellations. He hurled suns like weapons. each blow fueled by the rage of a billion wars. The Beyonder caught the edge of his blade in 2 fingers and whispered, "Why must it always be fury?" With that, Khorne's armies of demons faltered, their rage draining into silence. For the briefest instant, the blood god himself felt confusion. Tzeentch followed. Rivers of sorcery cascaded across the void. Time itself bent and rewove into impossible paradoxes. Infinite futures crashed against one another in a storm of schemes. Each thread meant to bind the stranger. But the Beyonder laughed, and in his laughter, all plans unraveled. "I am not a path," he said. "I am a question." And in that moment, Tzeentch's labyrinth faltered, undone by a truth he could never predict. Nurgle swelled next, his garden spreading rot and despair across the stars. Plagues that could wither empires and viruses, that unmade thought itself flowed toward the beast. He inhaled deeply and smiled. "This is pleasant. Acceptance is your gift. But I already accept all things." And in that acceptance, Nurgle's joy soured, his certainty cracked. For how could rot frighten one who welcomed death as curiosity? Slaanesh rose last, her voice a symphony of temptation. Every desire, every pleasure, every dream of perfection was offered in a single whisper. "Stay with me," she purred. "Taste infinity." The Beyonder looked upon her brilliance, her elegance, her unending promise of bliss. And then he turned away. Perfection is boring. For the first time since her birth, Slaanesh felt insulted. And in that wound, fear bloomed. The chaos gods recoiled. Here was no mortal to corrupt, no god to bargain with, no soul to consume. This was something beyond comprehension, not prayer, not hunger, not ambition. Power without need, will without cost, creation without purpose. To them, it was the greatest blasphemy of all. And then, across the immaterium, a new fire blazed. The Emperor stirred. His body still rotted upon the golden throne, but his soul stretched vast as a star, burning through the warp. His voice did not echo, but thundered in truth. "You do not belong here," he told the Beyonder. "Your presence unravels all." The Beyonder smiled. "Unraveling is learning. Why preserve the tapestry if one never sees the threads?" And then it began. Their clash was unlike any war in history. No blade, no bolt, no spell could describe it. This was will against will, truth against truth. The Emperor was discipline, sacrifice, the survival of mankind at any cost. The Beyonder was freedom, whim, the joy of curiosity unbound. Across the galaxy, mortals collapsed as their clash rippled through existence. Stars flickered. The Astronomicon faltered. The warp itself screamed. On Cadia, guardsmen dropped to their knees as visions seared their minds. They saw a galaxy where chaos was gone, erased with a thought. They saw another where mankind was free, gods dethroned, tyranny shattered. They saw another still where everything was nothing, a void of silence. And they wept, for none of them could know which was truth. The Emperor roared. "I fight for mankind's survival," the Beyonder replied, smiling. "I fight for nothing that makes me free." And in that clash, chaos itself trembled. For though the gods feasted on mortal emotions, they too felt the strain. They saw not just the death of mortals, but the death of meaning. For what are gods but the echoes of belief? And what is belief against a being who needed none? The eye of terror convulsed. Demon worlds cracked. Reality howled, and still the battle raged. The eye of terror shook with fury. A storm, unlike any in its long, twisted history. The Chaos Gods had unleashed their full wrath, and the Emperor himself had poured every fragment of his will into resisting the stranger. Yet the Beyonder did not fall. He did not bleed. He did not even struggle. He only watched, amused, as gods and emperors exhausted themselves against his indifference. And then, with a smile, he grew bored. For the Beyonder, curiosity was everything. But now he had his answer. He had tested the galaxy's champions, shattered its illusions, bent its gods to the breaking point. He had seen war turn to silence, desire turn to dust, faith turn to folly. There was nothing more to learn. And so, as suddenly as he had arrived, he departed. No explosion, no farewell. He simply ceased to be. The chaos he left behind, however, remained. Across the Imperium, reality buckled under the weight of what he had done. Armageddon burned as orcs, infused with impossible belief, split the sky with weapons born of pure conviction. Kadia groaned beneath the pressure of demonic invasion, the blackstone pylons straining to hold back a tide of unreality. In the far reaches of the galaxy, Tyranid fleets froze, confused, haunted by the echo of the question he had asked. What if hunger was not enough? And in the eye of terror itself, the Chaos Gods trembled. For though they had not been destroyed, they had glimpsed something far worse than death. They had seen. They were born from mortal need, rage, despair, lust, ambition. Yet here was power that needed nothing. Not prayer. Not worship. Not sacrifice. The Beyonder's presence had been a mirror, showing them that for all their grandeur, they were chained to mortals, dependent upon the weak they claimed to rule. And when he laughed at them, they felt for the first time not anger, but smallness. On the golden throne, the Emperor fell silent once more. His will, strained beyond measure, returned to its vigil. Yet he too had felt the weight of the encounter. He had seen what mankind could be if freed from the prison of fear, if liberated from gods, from T-Warp, even from himself. He had glimpsed a future without chains. And though his duty chained him still, a whisper lingered in the hollow of his soul. What if the stranger was right? For the mortals of the galaxy, the scars were strangers still. Some whispered of visions in their sleep of lives remade in an instant, of freedom so vast it felt like madness. Others remembered nothing, only the terror of stars flickering and the astronomican dimming. Many clung tighter than ever to faith, convinced that without belief, only oblivion awaited. Others doubted for the first time, shaken by the thought that perhaps even gods could be mocked. The Inquisition buried the truth, branding it heresy to even speak of the event. The Mechanicus called it a data anomaly. The Eldar wept in silence, for their farseers had seen the strands of destiny fray, unravel, and not again into something they no longer recognized. The Necrons, broken once more by the Beyonder's whims, whispered among themselves of a power even older than their silent king and shuddered. And yet, across the stars, life went on. Ships still sailed, armies still marched. The eternal war did not end. For the 41st millennium is a graveyard of hope, and even a godlike intruder could not erase the weight of history. The galaxy returned to its slaughter, limping back into familiar patterns of war, tyranny, and despair. But not unchanged. In the Immaterium, the Chaos Gods gathered once more. They did not boast. They did not plot. Instead, they whispered of the stranger, the terror he had left behind. Not the terror of death, not the terror of defeat, but the terror of meaninglessness. For if such beings existed, power without hunger, creation without worship, will without chains, then what were they? What was chaos? But a shadow, a reflection of lesser minds. For the first time, the ruinous powers feared not destruction, but and far beyond the galaxy, the realities higher still. Beyonder laughed, not cruelly, not kindly, but as one who had asked a question and found his answer. To him, gods and mortals, empires and wars were all the same puzzles, curiosities, fleeting sparks in an ocean of thought. He had learned what he wished to learn, and he moved on, but his shadow lingered. For those who had glimpsed him, one truth could never be forgotten. Even gods are but questions waiting to be asked. And so, the galaxy endured. Not saved, not destroyed, but reminded, in the most profound way, that everything they worshipped, everything they fought for, everything they feared, might one day be nothing more than a curiosity in the mind of something greater, and that, perhaps, is the most terrifying truth of all.